Hey everybody, Professor Snart. As we checking in as we continue zooming along in our course here. As I think mentioned the last time I checked in, it's important that obviously as we work through our various units here, you're keeping an eye on our upcoming fiction workshop. So the assignment for this unit will be to write a short story, but I don't really expect anyone to necessarily start it after they've finished Unit 4 or done all that other stuff. So it's something you can kind of have in your mind, have on the back burner, be working on actively as we get towards that unit. Unlike kind of the most of the work in the other units we do, which is pretty, unit specific, sort of contained within that unit. Okay, so speaking of which, we are just finishing up Unit 3, the metaphor or analogy, simile discussion board, and now we move into Unit 4, kind of a micro writing assignment that I think is really interesting and a pretty fun one to do. So I'm going to click us into it. This is a unit that's arranged really by these folders, and there's sort of some content ones and then the assignment one. So the content ones you can work through. This is a fairly common, theoretical premise for how stories operate and what pieces they've got. And like any good theory, it applies to like very few actual examples. There's always little variations about where exactly things occur. You can kind of debate maybe what that moment of conflict is or that complication or whatever it happens. Having said that, though, it is important that as you think of your story for that workshop, for the fiction workshop coming up, it does need to reflect, not this sort of perfect triangle where the crisis or turning point is exactly in the middle. That's not really the point. The point is that you've got all or most of these pieces, or have thought about if you don't have particular moments or particular pieces, is there a reason? Have you intentionally left that out, not just forgot it or were unaware of it? So like the visual is useful, but it's not supposed to indicate exactly maybe the balance of a short story, if we could put it that way, so you don't have to have a 10-pager with the thing, the crisis right here in the 5 or 6 range. The crisis could be something that really initiates what's happening. We could have most of it lead up to this moment of crisis that happens, and then a really quick kind of end to the story, that things are not necessarily resolved. Again, you don't necessarily have to have a resolution or a lot of falling action after this sort of climactic moment. But if you don't have those things, there needs to be a reason why. Again, I'm more concerned that you're just aware of these components than necessarily following an exact formula. There's no, secret pattern that you have to have for writing a successful story. If only there were. Okay. So more of a content thing, not really things to do here. Stories to read. There's one from our book, but also an e-book. And one of the things that you'll see happen in Blackboard sometimes is that there's reference to a piece of audio, piece of video, an ebook like should be here, but there's just a big old blank space. I know it's happening to me right now. It actually has to do with the way browsers and Blackboard both together are trying to be more secure. So when there's content from outside that's trying to show up inside, it will often block it until you as the user have taken some action. So I've put a kind of walkthrough for if you're using Explorer, Chrome, or Firefox. Like in Firefox, you'll see this little shield icon up in the URL or the address bar, which is precisely what I see in mine. It's off the screen capture here. But if you let me go through the steps, I click the shield, allow, disable, wide open, whatever. You'll notice that then the right stuff pops up, and it's actually really handy to have the ebook embedded right in the course. I think it's really great, but it does sometimes take some action on your part to deal with this mixed content thing. I've also built a new menu link browser help, which repeats that same information, so you can find it a little bit more easily. So if we go back to our unit, whoops, wrong unit. You may in fact run into that same absent content problem in the assignment itself, which is a really fun one. So it's based on this audio that I encountered in a show called Marketplace, which I heard on NPR, mostly economics stories. It's really interesting and really thought-provoking. This one happened to be about a book that was built or designed as an experiment that these two guys did, taking, like, could they take more or less valueless objects, these little tchotchkes or trinkets, you know, just sort of things like that, oddities, that weren't worth anything, have authors write backstories that were completely fictitious. There's no truth to it. And then have people bid on eBay about, and could they increase the value of the item just using that story, which is a really interesting thing for us to think about, like how does a narrative, how does a story attached to something all of a sudden give it value where none existed before. And I get, so the other thing that you should be aware of is that the selling on eBay was totally transparent. In other words, these guys were really careful to say, this is an experiment, the backstory is totally fake, this little thing is not actually worth $10,000, or, you know, whatever the case might have been. And so, truth be told, there's lots of complicating things that we're not going to think about, like, does the value really just become the author's name, not even the story so much? So if I wrote something, okay, then it sells for like $1.50. If somebody super famous writes something, then it's like 150, 15,000, whatever. That has nothing to do with the story per se, but more with the author name. That's kind of a whole separate, you know, authors as celebrities issue that we're not really going to get into. But the exercise to take a little trinket, something that you actually own, you're not just going to Google, you know, tchotchke here and find something odd looking, something that you actually have and that you can take a picture of, and then write a story, a backstory for it that gives it value. So a couple of the things that are going to shape what we do here is that we have a really limited word count, so you can't just go on and on and on and on and on. So you have to be really descriptive in a really short space of time, which is great practice for us. And the other really important thing to think about, and you'll hear it or see it when you read the example for this little guy here, is that the way you impart value to a thing, and this really goes for all kinds of fiction, but for our work here specifically, is not to say that this thing is really meaningful to me because my mom gave it to me when I turned 12, and 12, that was a really hard time in my life. Okay, that's meaningful for you, but I don't then think, oh my gosh, I got to spend money on this thing because that story is just so interesting. It's interesting to the author and meaningful to the author, but really to nobody else. So you can't just tell me a story about how your mom gave you this and your mom's really important. I get it. I like your mom too. But you've got to make a story that provides interest to kind of any reader out there. So there has to be something like historical or just kind of quirky or something going on. The other thing you'll notice about the story that accompanies this little guy is that it notices all the little details about his crazy hair hat here, his dancing feet, the fact that he's on a little tiny sliver of wood. All of that feeds into the story that's told about him. So that's what marks a great short piece of fiction of the kind that we're reading here. And you can find, you know, lots more examples through the website. And it really pays to read through a number of those before you launch into trying to write your own. It's really important that you have a picture associated with yours, so take a picture, make sure it posts here so we can see it. And again, in a fairly limited number of words, make us care about this object beyond just because it's meaningful to you. That's the real challenge. Okay, and then keep your head up because we have Unit 5, our first fiction workshop, coming around pretty soon. If you have any questions or concerns, as always, be in touch with me, and I'll get right back to you.